Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to apologise in advance for my nerves. My name is Niamh Boyle and I'm a sepsis survivor. This day last year I was on a ventilator in intensive care suffering from septic shock. Bang on trend in the middle of Sepsis Awareness Week. I've been trying to promote sepsis as part of a fundraising campaign for my new hand, which I'll discuss later on. But as part of this promotion publicity, I was asked to come and to take part and to speak about my experience. And I took the opportunity with two hands. I'll just give you a bit of background to myself. I'm married to my DCU college sweetheart Niamh, mother of 4 children, 7, 5, 3 and 1, Oren, Rian, Ewan and Arden. I'd be in a lot of trouble if I didn't mention the names. I'm a chartered accountant by profession, but I've been a stay-at-home mother for 7 years. From Dundalk in County Louth. I have a huge interest in music and until last year enjoyed playing and composing music for the piano. In August last year I gave birth to my 4th baby, an event that I'd look forward to with great anticipation. I had a normal delivery, no complications. It was a fast labour, 45 minutes. I had a small tear which was sutured and I went back to the postnatal ward. Around 12 hours post-delivery, I began to suffer quite debilitating abdominal pain. It was more intense uterus contractions than I had experienced in my previous 3 babies. I was given analgesics to combat the pain, which I continued to take when I came home from hospital. 3 days after delivery, I started to get an horrendous pain in my elbow, and it was excruciating. It felt like somebody was pulling my arm behind my back and up between my shoulder blades. It was nothing like I'd ever experienced before. My parents came straight over to look after 3 of our children, so my husband, myself and our new baby could drive to A&E. On arrival in A&E, my symptoms were the extreme pain in my elbow and severe shortness of breath. I had an X-ray on my elbow which came back clear, but it was the main focus as the pain was so intolerable. I don't have a clear memory of the events of the next number of hours as it became quite confused and disorientated. My husband explained that he'd never seen me react to pain in such a way, and when my mother came in to visit that morning, she mentioned that I wasn't behaving like myself. My husband was subsequently told I was in septic shock and I'd need to go on a ventilator to support my breathing. He was told it'd be for around 24 hours, but it ended up being for 9 days. This day last year was my worst. My husband and parents were told it would be my last in this world, and the most optimistic odds of survival were 10%. I was in multi-organ failure. Even with the ventilator, my lungs were struggling. I was on dialysis for my kidneys. A priest visited me and I was given the last rites. The ventilator was an experience that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. For me, being in a coma, it wasn't being asleep. It was 9 days of constant nightmares, separated by moments of awareness where I could hear unfamiliar voices and feel my body being adjusted and cleaned. I was screaming out for help, but nobody could hear me. When no one was responding to my cries for help, I assumed those voices were people preparing my body for a wake. And unfortunately for me, I'd watched a horror movie to that effect not long prior. But the nightmares were worse than anything you could expect to see in a horror movie. They were of my children, my husband, my mother all being brutally murdered. It would have beaten the entire Saw franchise hands down for shock value and gore. My feet and my hands became mottled. At one point, purple spots appeared on my ear. I had a group A streptococcal infection. My temperature was up at 42 degrees. I was on multiple antibiotics to treat the infection. I was given 20 kilos of fluid to keep my vital organs alive. As the infection began to become controlled, the outcome for my limbs worsened. Markers were used to determine if the mottled skin was increasing, which was being adjusted up daily until one day it began to recede. And it continued to recede until it stopped at my left fingers and my right toes, and they became necrotic and turned black. When I woke from the coma, I spent the next few days having frightening hallucinations. When the staff would leave the room, creatures would slide in and bite my hair off. I could feel them biting my hair off. I could see them as real as all of you are sitting here today. It was terrifying. I was given a drug for the following few days that got rid of those creatures, and thankfully I never saw them again. One of my first memories after I woke up was of a doctor saying to me that I'd suffered toxic shock syndrome. I remember thinking, that's impossible. That's what happens when you leave tampons in for longer than 8 hours. I'd never heard of anybody getting that for any other reason. I was told I was going to have my left fingers and my right toes amputated at some point in the future, and my first thought was, I'll never play the piano again. My bed was surrounded by family photographs, holy water, and about 2.3 million crucifixes. I started to wonder about the preceding events. I was drip-fed the information about what had happened over the previous 9 days to allow me to adjust and decipher it all. In the following days, I began physio to learn to walk again. With the excess fluid on my small frame, it was difficult. It was probably a week before I could get out of bed and walk around with the aid of a nurse or a physio. I completed 4 pregnancies without stretch marks, but the fluid I received in ICU ended that achievement. Things appeared to be getting better. I continued antibiotics and various medications, and apart from the necrosis, my prognosis was positive. Around 10 days after I woke up, I had an ambulance transfer to another hospital for an appointment relating to the upcoming surgery. On returning from that appointment, I had some physio, and I was tired after all the activity that day, so I was settling down for the evening. But suddenly I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was gasping for air, but it felt like I was breathing in sand. There was no oxygen in the air. I was terrified. The doctor who was attending to another I called the doctor who was attending to another patient in HDU, and I said, I can't breathe. Suddenly there were several doctors and nurses surrounding my bed. I remember thinking, I hope I just pass out so I don't have to experience what felt like suffocation. After a couple of hours, I became conscious again, having experienced flash pulmonary edema. My husband had waited in the waiting area while I was being stabilised. He'd experienced all over again what he thought was over. It was at that point I was transferred to a cardiac care unit at another hospital, where I was due to get the surgery anyway. I spent the next few weeks receiving intravenous antibiotics, taking cardiac medication, getting physio, and building myself up for surgery. And after being in hospital for a total of 6 weeks, I had my amputations. The surgery itself lasted for 4 hours. The pain in my foot was tolerable with pain relief, but the pain in my hand, even with all the pain relief on offer, was excruciating. I can only describe it as feeling like there was a ball of fire sitting on the edge of my wrist. And that feeling remained for about 48 hours. On the 3rd day, the pain started to subside, but the dressing changes were a whole other level of pain, an event which I used to dread. 1 week after the surgery, I was discharged, and I was very relieved to be going home to my family. I had a lot of help over the following weeks, which was invaluable. But a few days after getting home, I started to get a redness and swelling around my right elbow. During my follow-up appointments for suture removal, etc., I mentioned the swelling and took oral antibiotics, but unfortunately it was unresponsive. And I had to be hospitalised 4 weeks after my initial discharge for another surgery. I was brought to theatre, and it transpired that I had a gangrenous vein in my arm, which was removed. And I have a lovely scar there now, which gives credence to my crocodile story. I was discharged and was relieved to have the full use of my right arm again after being compromised due to the gangrenous vein. Everybody who came to the house told me 2 things. Firstly, I was so lucky to be alive. And secondly, thank God it was my left hand that was affected. But I didn't feel lucky to be alive. I didn't thank God it was my left hand. My left hand never served as a pretty decoration. I played the piano with it. I ran it through my children's hair. I expressed myself with it. I wore my wedding ring on it. I wondered if I'd have gotten more sympathy if I had been left-handed. And I think when you play music, you become ambidextrous to a certain extent, and I felt like I was being cheated out of all the things I loved in life. And I had 4 children in one hand, and it didn't add up. So my husband decided that there was no way in 2017 people should be expected to live one-handed. There had to be a solution. We knocked on a lot of doors, and we were told the same thing. I had too much tissue remaining. I was shocked to find out that I would have had a lot of prosthetic options if I'd had a higher level of amputation. I was horrified I could be facing more surgery to make me compatible for life-saving technology. I struggled to come to terms with the fact that this wasn't something I was aware of before I had had my surgery. Eventually, after months of research and closed doors, my husband found a company called Touch Bionics in Scotland. And although a higher level of amputation would have been a superior result, they said they could work around my situation. And words can't describe my relief. I felt like there was hope. The only problem was the cost of €65,000. My husband, being the problem solver he is, set up a Gofundme campaign page in my name, and thanks to the generosity of the Irish public and indeed people across the globe, the campaign has raised in excess of €52,000. We arranged to meet with 2 Touch Bionics representatives in APOS in Galway in May, and they had a prototype for me to train with. It felt like I had my hand back. Suddenly I was doing 2-handed tasks again. Training involved learning about muscle movements that would trigger sensors in the hand and control its patterns. After 2 weeks, the finished hand was sent to Ireland in a large black Touch Bionics box suitcase, similar to what an organ for transplant is transported in. I waited in great anticipation of that day. After 9 months of only having the use of one hand, it couldn't come quick enough. This hand gave me my life back. It felt like my hand, even though it didn't look like it. I was able to do things as fast as I used to. I had the strings of my guitar reversed and learned left-handed using my new hand to hold the plectrum. People didn't pity me anymore. People didn't feel sorry for me. They didn't have that look in their eyes when they spoke to me. They started to look at me and treat me like they used to. And the best thing of all was they stopped trying to help me do things. I began to get amusement from asking people if they wanted a hand with that. Children think I'm like Luke Skywalker. Adults think I'm like Terminator, which I can only assume is intended as a compliment. The media called me Bionic Mum. Suddenly something so horrendous became positive and cool. And nowadays I preempt people. When I see someone for the first time since I was sick, I say, I am so lucky to be alive, and thank God with my left hand. And when people ask me how I am, I say I'm still alive, but it was touch and go there for a while. Without trying to be dramatic, this hand truly saved my life. I describe it as life-saving rather than life-changing because for me that's exactly what it was. I was able to be the mother that walked out the door that day. I was able to be the mother that those 4 children deserved. Instead of just existing, I was back to living life. I was back to me. I think it's difficult to imagine what living one-handed is like unless you've walked in those shoes. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, socially, the impact is huge. Maybe this was the hand I was dealt. Maybe I was meant to survive this so I could create better public awareness and prevent others from suffering the same fate. I would like to use this gift of life to achieve that, but to also campaign for better prosthetic awareness so that appropriate amputations are done at the outset for people who do go through this ordeal. I'd like to thank Karen, Mary and Christina for inviting me here today and for their support over the last few weeks. Thank you all for listening to me ramble on today. I look forward to talking to you later and maybe shaking your hand. I've been Niamh Boyle. Thank you very much.